Hello, I'm Hamish, filmmaker and video essayist, and today I'm talking about what if Jean Harlow had lived. Now, for some of you who've watched my Marilyn video and pushed back on the idea of Marilyn being the 1950s version of Harlow, let me just say, if you call someone a blonde bombshell, you're talking about Jean Harlow. If you call someone a platinum blonde, you're talking about Jean Harlow. So let's just put it right out there. Jean Harlow was the original platinum blonde bombshell of the 20s and 30s. She was famously discovered by Howard Hughes and was the favourite actress of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn was originally planning to call herself Marilyn Harlow after Jean Harlow. Now, she has appeared in 4 films that have been deemed selected for the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, being City Lights of 1931, The Public Enemy, also 1931, the original Scarface, 1932, and Red Dust, 1932. Now, these are all wonderful films, but might I point out she was first discovered by Howard Hughes and put in his film Hell's Angels, which is covered in the biopic about him called The Aviator. And my personal favourite is her appearance in the All-Star MGM cast of Dinner at 8, a kind of follow-up in spirit to Grand Hotel. I think Jean Harlow is really fun in that role. Now, as you can see by the visual, I am doing a drawing. And I don't usually talk about the drawings at the same time. I just want to point out how difficult it was, and as you can maybe see, is to draw Jean Harlow. I think maybe one of the interesting things about doing a drawing about someone that you're studying is that you learn a lot about them. And what I learnt about Harlow is the way that she was able to feminize her face. She's a very, very feminine woman, but when it comes time to draw her and try to capture her, what you notice is, like Garbo, she had a bit of a square jaw, she had the cleft chin, famously with Kirk Douglas. These are features which, you tend to associate with, these strong, handsome men, but here we find them with Jean Harlow. She has these big, beautiful eyes, hooded lids, and a very strong brow bone. Again, a very masculine feature. And all of this together, putting all of this together, makes it quite hard to capture her beauty. So anyway, you can judge how successfully I did, and at the end of the video I'll make some comments about that as well. All of this together, I don't want to say anything against anyone who has these features. Maybe it's just something that I think doing all these drawings of these really, famous beauties, I think what you realize is that what makes them special are the things that make them unique. And I think these days people tend to get very self-conscious of their uniqueness and rush off to a plastic surgeon to get rid of them. And I'd like to say to myself and say to anyone listening that I think you need to embrace your uniqueness, because that is what makes you special. Okay, so back to Jean Harlow. So she famously, during her lifetime, turned down King Kong and Freaks. Now, especially Freaks, you can tell the role that she was going to play. They got a very Jean Harlow type in that film. You can't pick them all. I can imagine that Freaks would be a very strange film to be a part of. Anyway, so interestingly, so Harlow died suddenly at the age of 26 of kidney failure, basically. So, I did some research into her diet and her breakfast, like of coffee and an orange. It seemed a bit strange, and I sort of was blaming maybe it could be her diet, because we know actresses are put on some very strange diets, especially MGM actresses. Just look at Judy Garland. But apparently her fate was sealed by the scarlet fever she contracted when she was 14, and she had basically become a bit of a ticking time bomb after that, apparently. But, so this is a kind of what if, the sliding doors theory. What if she hadn't contracted scarlet fever? What might she have done? Little bit of trivia. Both Harlow and Monroe co-starred in their last films with Clark Gable. Harlow in Saratoga in 1937 and Monroe in The Misfits in 1961, which would also be Clark Gable's swan song. So at the time of her passing, she had been reading Gone with the Wind. Now, I'm not suggesting that she was going to play Scarlett O'Hara. Just about every actress wanted to play Scarlett O'Hara, along with Bette Davis. Jean Harlow was one of the first considered for the part. She had only read a few pages of the book before being rushed to hospital, with a nurse commenting that she would never finish the book. And she didn't. So one funny, I just want to make a comment of her final performance in Saratoga. Critic Graham Greene wrote, "Her technique was the gangster's technique. She toted a breast like a man totes a gun." And I think that is maybe an interesting thing to think about when comparing her with Marilyn Monroe. Watching Jean Harlow, there's a real toughness to her that Marilyn doesn't have. Like, I feel like Jean Harlow is one of those New York tough girls that would sooner, punch you in the nose than give you a kiss. And so I would almost say that her spiritual successor would be more like Judy Holliday rather than Marilyn Monroe. But you can obviously see where Marilyn gets some of her influences. So originally, going into the what ifs, because I don't think she would have played Scarlett O'Hara. But going into a definite what if, originally MGM planned to have her star as the female lead in the Maisie film franchise, but she was replaced by Anne Southern, who we all have watched in The Whales of August, 2 years following her sudden death. Now, this film franchise was about a showgirl that was stranded in a Wyoming town who ends up being hired as a maid at a ranch. And I can think you can definitely see how Jean Harlow would have been perfect for this. And apparently that was, I I think there was like a 9 film franchise. Like this could have been her version of like a Thin Man, or one of those serials, like Mexican Spitfire, that were popular at the time. Another film, MGM originally purchased the rights to the Horace McCoy novel, They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And the studio executives had planned to cast her and Clark Gable in the lead roles. Obviously, however, due to her sudden death, the project was put on hold and wasn't revitalized until in the late 1960s, when it starred Jane Fonda. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing to look at. Like, Jane Fonda, she also had that real toughness, like, not to keep bringing up the Hanoi Jane thing, but you can see Jane Fonda toting a gun. I think you can also see Jean Harlow toting a gun. Not to say anything about Harlow's political leanings. Nothing I've researched brought up anything about that. So that's another interesting prospect. That could have been, could have been a chance for her to showcase her dramatic prowess. Like, I know she often commented that she was not the greatest actress. Okay, now there is a story that exists stating that 2 of Metro's most popular star, again Harlow and Gable, they were to be loaned out to 20th Century Fox to appear in Old Chicago in 1938. So the exchange would have meant that Fox would have loaned their top star, Shirley Temple, to MGM to appear in The Wizard of Oz. And Harlow's death, however, caused these plans to be cancelled. Now, the story, according to IMDb, which is where I'm getting all of my information, is largely false. Now, while MGM indeed to plan to loan Harlow to Fox for In Old Chicago, it was supposed to be opposite Tyrone Power, but Gable and Temple were not involved in any planned loan-outs. And MGM didn't purchase the rights to The Wizard of Oz until after Harlow's death. But anyway, that's another film that Harlow was supposed to have made. Which basically tells the story of the O'Leary brothers, Honest Jack and Roguish Dion, who become powerful figures and rivals in Chicago on the eve of its Great Fire. So this is essentially a disaster film, and I haven't watched it, but I imagine that poor Jean Harlow would have been in the center of a love triangle. Again, this film won 2 Oscars, so this could have been a really nice thing, and it seems like MGM was maybe thinking of pushing Harlow into more dramatic fare, which is interesting considering Marilyn had to fight to have more dramatic fare. Okay, so that really sort of brings us up to the war. Now, what would have happened during the breakout? Now, obviously, America didn't enter the war for a couple of years, but I do have a hard time seeing Harlow in the MGM movies of the 40s. Obviously, the kind of like the Elizabeth Taylor National Velvets, or the these like the Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney type, Busby Berkeley, even though I know that's Warner's, but these like big budget musicals which were there to um, you know, to take our minds off the war. What now? I mean, obviously, Hell's Angel was a war film, so she could have played in some war films. I honestly see her being dropped by Metro and being picked up by Warner Brothers to play in some film noirs, because I can really see her in the type of film that Warner's made more than what MGM became in the 40s. So I think that's probably what would have happened. Yeah, so the likely films that would have been written for her that we'll never know of or see. So it's hard to imagine those types of films. In her absence, Betty Grable took over the mantle of the Blonde Bombshell for the 40s. But Betty is unique in that she doesn't have the hard edge of Harlow and Mae West. She has that real warmth. She wasn't just the pin-up girl. She represented what was waiting at home for the boys at war. She was beautiful, but she was a safe harbour. She represented more home-cooked dinners and apple pie. So while Harlow does have one of the funniest comic performances in Dinner at 8, I actually can't see her taking many films from Betty Grable. But yeah, as I said, I can definitely see her, 'cause she was in Public Enemy. I can definitely see her in more of these gangster films. Post-war, by the late 40s and 50s, she would have been heading towards 40 and had to pivot to mother roles, like the ones Mary Astor did for MGM with Little Women and Meet Me in St. Louis, which she would have likely have been great at, or she may have fought with Davis and Crawford at the Warner Brothers women's pictures. And yeah, perhaps she would have retired like Garbo and Clara Bow, the It Girl, only to return for one of those all-star Agatha Christie casts in the 70s. Or she may have done a sitcom on TV. Like, I can kind of see her being a little bit like Lucille Ball and pivoting to television in order to, stay home. So I will point out in the 50s there was a very Jean Harlow role in a film called Caged. Obviously not the title role, but there was this girl who, was a streetwalker who was just made up to look like Jean Harlow. So I can see that, but I think maybe in this sort of Pollyanna version, I hope she would have found love, and I hope she would have been able to get what she really wanted out of life. So maybe she should have settled down, had kids, and like Lucille Ball, she may have done a sitcom. And so that's Jean Harlow. So as you can see from what I've managed to create, I didn't quite capture Jean Harlow. Like the elements are there, but it was hard to balance these very masculine features without losing the femininity. So I kind of downplayed some of the more masculine features, like trying to capture that femininity. Like the woman in the picture I've drawn, I think looks less like Jean Harlow and more like a kind of daughter of Dolly Parton, Tammy Faye Baker, and Madonna. Now, I mean, speaking of Madonna, Madonna's definitely carried on a lot of Harlow's legacy, not necessarily as an actress, but she paid homage to her in Vogue, her song Vogue, and she also paid homage to her in the music videos for Vogue and Secret, and in the photo shoot for the CD insert booklet that came with her Bedtime Stories album. So, I think even though all these things didn't happen, her legacy has carried on. And she was referenced obviously in the Betty Davis Eyes song as well. So, yeah, even though she's a little bit forgotten today, her legacy is there, even if it's just in the fact that, whenever you see someone referred to as a platinum blonde, or if you see someone referred to as a bombshell, whenever you read this, I want you to think now, like, that's Jean Harlow that they're talking about. She's been referenced at that point. So thank you so much for listening. Tell me what you think down in the comments below. Do you agree with where I think she may have gone during World War II and post World War II, or do you see a different path for her? So thank you so much, and I'm so glad you stuck out to the end. For those of you who are still listening, please check out some of my other videos, and if you're interested, please check out my film about World War II called An American Piano. Thank you so much.